Hi, all. I am Julia. I am here with Target Test Prep, and then we are doing a study plan for 2026. So, like I said, this is our GMAT study plan for 2026. It is going to be step by step, and it is targeted at those that want a high score. So, we all know that getting a high score takes a lot of work. I am going to show you the type of work that you need to do to keep your prep efficient. First up, pre-GMAT work. I don't know where everyone is in their prep journey. You've got to start somewhere. Here is what I recommend to get a strong foundation. Before you start studying every single topic on the GMAT, it's good to get an idea of where your baseline score is. You do not want to get directly into the studying because it is it is a lot of material, and there are also some longer term goals that it helps to have time to let those percolate in your mind. So, first up, don't wait until after the GMAT to formulate your application plan. The applications are often only open for a couple of months a year, and it's hard to get information when they are not open. So, if you think that you might be looking into business school next year or the year after that, it's good to start checking the programs that you're interested in now so that you can get as much information as you can about the dates for different rounds, the sorts of questions that they typically ask in the application, any other information, so you can reach out to alums or current students to see if you would be interested in the program, anything like that. Giving yourself more time to plan with those dates in mind is better in the long run. And you can also do free consultations with admissions consultants. A lot of them will do free consultations for you. So if you are not really sure how your profile fits into the typical profile of your target program, or what kind of GMAT score you need to target, they can give you a bit more advice and tell you about how competitive you are, and maybe some information on about how long you should plan to spend on applications, because the GMAT is a lot of work, but it is only one aspect of your application. Let's see. Before you take your first practice test, I do recommend that you prep for a little bit just to familiarize yourself with the questions, particularly critical reasoning and data insights questions can be a bit tricky to understand if you don't have a basic understanding of what they are asking for or how to navigate through them. So you do want to take a baseline test before you study too much, just to see where you're starting. So once you have your baseline score and your goal score, you'll have an idea of how many points you need to improve your score. But if you take the baseline too early, you often end up losing a lot of points just because you are trying to figure out that there's multiple tabs and multi-source reasoning and that sort of thing. It wastes a bunch of time. You don't have a bunch of time on your mock. So you end up getting an artificially low score, and that can be discouraging. It's best to just spend some time, 10 to 20 hours, familiarizing yourself with the questions so that you can give a non-studied performance, but you're not completely cold. And this can also give you an idea of what types of resources you will need, because there are OG resources that are free, and reading through those might teach you if you're more of a read self-study type person, or if you would rather do a lecture style videos, that sort of thing. Explore some different options, because what is going to be the most beneficial for you to learn is probably the type of resource that would be worth your time and effort. All right. And I see we have some questions. let's see here. Oh, uh, we'll get to those later on. Um, so goal score, when you are trying to pick your goal score, there is a lot to consider. Mainly, you want to look at the scores of your target programs. If you don't have any target programs, that is not super helpful. I would recommend looking at the sort of rank that you would want for your target programs, even if you haven't decided. And then most schools publish their like median GMAT scores and even their like middle 80% of those admitted GMAT scores. You can plan from there. You don't necessarily want to aim for the average. It'll depend on your profile. So if your profile is really unique, then an average score might be a good fit. If you had a low undergraduate GPA, for instance, or there's something that you feel it would be beneficial to make up for in your GMAT, you're going to want to aim a little bit higher. If you want scholarships, typically you're going to want to aim 20 to 30 points higher than whatever the average for your school is, at least to give yourself a decent chance. And of course, your baseline score, which you got from your initial mock, can give you an idea of how much you want to prepare. You might decide that you're fine with a slightly lower score because you don't want to prepare for 8 months instead of 6 months, and that is totally fine too. It is all about getting information, deciding where you're at, and deciding what your goals are. What are some good free resources for taking the baseline test? You can take it on MBA.com. The GMAT provides resources and they provide you two mocks for free and then a bit of like review material, pretty small amount, but some practice questions and then two actual mocks that are in the structure of the exam. And so you can get a feel for the total time and all of the different sections and picking your section order, that sort of thing. Okay. There are two phases of GMAT prep: learning phase and practice test phase. The biggest phase is the learning phase. That is going to be all of the time that you spend learning material. Here's what you don't want to do. You don't want to learn a little bit and then take more practice tests and then learn a little bit more and then go and take more practice tests. For one, it's kind of draining to take practice tests. They take several hours, they take a lot of energy, then you have to review them. It's it's not the most efficient way to actually learn material to just take practice tests after practice tests, and I also don't think it's the most fun way to learn. You are better off actually learning some material, doing some questions of that type. So you want to learn about some statistics, you do some statistics questions and you read up on statistics. And when you're happy, then you can go on to the next topic and then use your practice tests as a way to mix, do mixed review and to practice sitting for long periods of time. So if you wanted to make a little custom question set, after you had done 5 or 6 topics, you could do that, pick those types of questions, and then have a practice set like that. If you want to do a full length practice test, though, after your initial one, you're better off saving those until the end because that way, when they tell you that you need to work on something, it's news to you and it's not just, oh, well, I know I don't know anything about ratios. I haven't done those lessons yet. Like I haven't even started practicing ratios. That doesn't really tell you anything new. So if you save them until the end, it can point out gaps in your prep that you need to revisit. master one topic at a time. Especially in quant, it is important to start with the more basic topics and work your way to the more advanced topics because they build on each other. Math in general is pretty, it builds, the later topics build on the earlier topics. And so if you start with the easier topics, get good at those as you move up, the challenge will be a good, healthy level and not just frustrating. If you master one topic at a time, then it's easier to see where you're struggling. You can spend a bit more time on things that you were not doing so well on. If you try to do mixed sets of topics that you haven't reviewed individually, then maybe you're not doing well because you had a bad day or any number of other things. But if you are studying, for instance, weak in the argument and you are just only doing those questions and you're consistently missing them, that shows you that you need to spend a bit more time on those. So the more you do topic by topic studying, the more exactly you can pinpoint areas that you need to study extra. And that is where you can strengthen your performance across the board and get to those really high points levels. For each topic, learn the concepts and strategies involved in the topic first. Practicing the topic untimed is also really important, um, because you're going to have about 2 minutes a question, give or take a couple of seconds in each section. If you stop working on questions after 2 minutes, when you are learning new topics, it's very hard to ever get to a really high accuracy point. But if you practice untimed, you can get to the point where you can answer questions correctly, and then you can work on bringing your time down, because there's two parts to answering the questions correctly within the time frame: answering them within the time frame and answering them correctly. You can answer them within the time frame all you want, but if you aren't getting them correct, that doesn't do you a lot of good. Whereas if you at least get in the habit of getting them correct, sitting through the thought process, like trying to reason through the problems, then you can get more efficient at reasoning through the problems in shorter amounts of time because you've already done it. Whereas if you've always answered your questions in 2 minutes, then there's not an opportunity to develop your accuracy in the same way. What are some good, or is there like a list of topics? There are a few different lists of topics. There are question banks on GMAT Club that have them sorted by different like types of questions. I think that that's really useful. The OG materials will also have categories of questions, but their categories are pretty broad. And so that can be harder to, it can be harder to target, all algebra, any amount of algebra than it is to target more specific things, or like all CR questions that have an argument in them. That could be several different types of questions. So the GMAT Club resources are good because it will be like, oh, identify assumptions, strengthen the argument, weaken the argument, and you can just pick one at a time, look up tips on that one. You've got your question bank, and then go from there. And I know at TTP we have a blog with a list of some of the topics if you are just learning about the different topics covered in different sections. And then importantly for topics, there are different question types in data insights because they are like interactive, a lot of them. So they'll have tables, they'll have graphs that you have to sort through, that sort of thing. They are over the same topics as the quant and verbal questions. They're just, the format is different. So they're usually more like visual graph type representations of the same sort of math and verbal skills you've already learned. So that is why usually the DI topic list is just the different types of questions, because it covers anything from quant and verbal that you could ask about from a chart. And That's why I have this, master quant and verbal before data insights. If you try to go into data insights too soon, then you will struggle and you won't know whether it's because of the format or because you don't know the underlying concepts. So it's best to do your quant and verbal. I recommend alternating between quant and verbal because doing too much quant or verbal in a row can lead to burnout in my experience. So if I didn't feel like studying quant one day, I would just go and study verbal, even though it's still studying, it feels like a little bit different. Um, Data sufficiency is an exception since they remodeled the GMAT. It used to be primarily quant and verbal section, and data sufficiency was part of the quant section. So a lot of the quant questions and quant question banks include data sufficiency. It's also a pretty direct translation in many cases. And I think with data sufficiency, the questions are a little bit hard to wrap your head around, sort of like other DI question types, because you don't necessarily need to solve them to completion. You just need to be able to get a definitive answer. And it takes some practice to learn how to know when you could get a definitive answer and then stop there, answer the data sufficiency question, and save that extra time to move on. So it's good to practice it with quant so you could get past that initial compulsion to work everything all the way through. Review is important. There is a lot of material, and if you start with topic one and then you don't review it at all, then by the time you're done with topic 35, topic one might be a little bit blurry. So it's good to review regularly just to keep things in the back of your mind, let your mind process through some of those issues that you have. A lot of that stuff gets better with time. I know in my experience working on a topic I maybe initially wasn't very confident in, but after some periodic review a couple of months later, I was way more confident. A lot of that just comes from spending time with the material and letting your mind consciously and subconsciously work its way through the topic. Spaced repetition is really valuable for unlearning bad behaviors. So, say you solved a question incorrect. You had a quant question and your approach to it wasn't right at all. You missed some keyword. You were supposed to do a difference of squares and you didn't see it. And so you did a bunch of unnecessary math. If you go through and you see what you did wrong right after you take the question. Oh, I missed this question. Let me see what I did wrong. Should have done difference of squares. It would have taken 30 seconds instead of the 5 minutes that I spent longhand multiplying these 6-digit numbers against each other. Give yourself some time to forget what the solution was and then try the question again to see if you do it correct the second time. Then you can unlearn those behaviors and you can see what progress you're making in unlearning your initial instinct to solve it the way that you don't want to solve it. So I'm a big fan of spaced repetition. Go through, miss it the first time, give yourself a week, say, come back, try it again. If you make the same mistake, review again, and then give yourself another week and try it a third time. And eventually you will remember what the best way to solve it is. And flashcards are great for things that you want to memorize. There's not a ton of vocabulary on the GMAT. It is different from the GRE in that way. So you won't have to do vocab flashcards, but there are still lots of things that you can benefit from putting on flashcards, like if you have a hard time remembering certain formulas, then that would be the most obvious thing. But you can also do clues like the one that I just mentioned difference of squares, I had flashcards for that because it was something that I was prone to forgetting. Anything that you want to trigger in your mind, oh, if I see this word, it means this. If I see it set up like this, then it means I should take this action. Anything like that that you can throw on flashcards can be really helpful because the more the more you get in practice of seeing the trigger that you want to be triggering you into an action and then remembering to do that action, the more likely you will do that on test day. Let's see. I'm completely blank and a little overwhelmed by the information available online about GMAT prep from scratch. Yeah, I'm sure that you are. Is there a clear path to follow that can help get a 700? The thing about having one clear path is it'll depend a little bit on your background, what your needs for review are. So you kind of have to choose your own adventure if you're going to prepare from scratch. And there are lots of study plans and programs like TTP that will give you a detailed list of all of the material that you might run into. But if you want to do your own material, then you really do have to experiment a little bit and see what areas you're stronger in, what areas you're weaker in, what requires a lot of review from you, and what you're probably okay on. But you can do it, absolutely. You can still do very well on the exam if you build your own path. It's just because it's custom to you, it will take a lot of research to find all of the things that you might want to include. If you do want to build your own path, though, as I mentioned earlier, the GMAT Club has the question banks that are categorized by the type of question, and I think that that would be really valuable to look into. Do I have to finish all the lessons and exams from TTP to excel at GMAT? That also kind of depends on you. I recommend doing the lessons and exams until at least you're very confident. But if you're just absolutely knocking every chapter and test out of the park and there's 8 and you already perfectly answered 6 of them, then I don't know how much you would get from doing the last 2, but if there is still stuff that you don't feel super confident on, then taking those extra tests is a great way to build that confidence. I am preparing for GRE for B school as I have experience with that test. Is it fine or should I try GMAT? The GRE and the GMAT are different in a couple of ways. They're the same in a lot of ways, but they are different, particularly the verbal section and what it expects vocabulary wise, pretty different. And there's not data insights on the GRE. So I would look at some of the differences of the tests and see if they are things that you think would appeal to your test taking style and to your previous skills. A lot of people switch from one to the other. So there's lots of, I know TTP has blogs that help you compare the two tests. I would not switch because you think one will be easier in general than the other, because I don't think that that's true. I think that they're challenging in different ways, but I also would not keep studying the one that you've been studying and refuse to switch because you've put so much time into the one that you've been studying, because that's a sunk cost fallacy. It might be worth it to you to switch. And like I said, there is a lot of overlap. I would just look at the differences between the two exams and decide if you think that would one structure would suit you better than the other. What was my goal? 805. Honestly, my goal wasn't 805 exactly. My goal was just as high as I could do. So I was going for scholarships, and so I wanted the highest score I could possibly get, and I got the highest score I could possibly get. So I feel like that worked out well for me. Error tracking. This is a thing that I did not want to do that was really helpful. I don't think that most people want to look through their mistakes and then write them into a log, but it is honestly so beneficial for your improvement in your study because the more detailed you can be about the mistakes you're making, including things like what type of question was it? What answer did you pick? Why did you pick that one? What was the correct answer? Why didn't you pick the correct answer? Was there some sort of like trap or pattern or mistake that you made? The more detailed you can be about those, the easier you can look through your error log and be like, "Oh, I always do this. Oh, I always feel like I'm in a hurry and I don't read the answer choices through to the end and then I just pick one." Well, now you know maybe you should read them all the way to the end. That's a bit of a silly example, but also I think it's something that most people have done. I know that I've done it. Sometimes you're in a hurry and you're like, "Who has time to read this? It's probably right." And then it's not. Now I read things to the end. It helps you figure out what you need to address. And that is at the higher level the only way to make significant improvement, in my opinion. Because at the lower level, you're learning things. Of course, you're going to get better, like your score will improve. At the higher level, you have to be detailed about what mistakes you're making so you can stop making those mistakes or the sort of traps that you tend to fall for so that you can learn to look out for those and pick them less often. And that's why, like when I did my mocks, I think my lowest mock was a 615. And spending a lot of time reviewing those mocks, looking at my errors, seeing what they were, but also why I was doing them is what allowed me to get to an 805. It is difficult to do, but if you do that, you can really hit the high levels. It is worth the work if your goal is a really high score. And improve your performance efficiently. So that was one thing I would tell myself as well whenever I was doing my error log that I didn't want to do. Hey, this work now is just less work later. So I might as well do it now, and then future me will be so happy that I did it, and I was. Later in your prep, as I mentioned earlier, once you have a few chapters of any or a few topics of any section under your belt, you can start doing mixed sets. As you get further along in your prep, you'll be able to do more and more mixed sets because you'll have covered more topics, and that will more closely resemble the real testing experience. So you're kind of working your way up in stamina and energy, but also in the breadth of topics that you feel like you can perform well on in a mix. So later in your prep, it's also good to do mixed sets of quant questions, verbal questions, and DI questions because you're going to have to do all three types of questions on test day, and being able to pivot between the sections is really helpful. How did I error track? Wrote them down or took screenshots. I use TTP and they have an error tracker with like a drop down, but I also did a bit on, so it has a drop down menu of descriptions of common errors, but some of my errors didn't quite fit the descriptions, or I felt like the descriptions weren't, it would be something very specific. So I also did a bit just on an Excel. Oh, here's this question number whatever in this location. Um, I did this specific thing, and that way I could see like exactly the mistake I was making. And also because there were specific errors, it was pretty easy to see the pattern because I would have to go to my Excel sheet and write down like the silly specific thing that I kept doing and watch Excel like auto fill in. the description. So Excel is great if you want to do it that way. And there were also some error trackers that pre-exist, but they might use slightly broader categorizations. The more detail you can put in there, the better. You just want to note the question so that you can find it again, and then the answer that you chose, the correct answer, and why you chose the answer that you chose. How much time did it take me to finish TTP? 9-ish months. With I did like all the lessons, and then I picked the highest score tier. I think if you pick, depending on what score tier you pick and what base score you start with, I think it does not include all of the lessons. But I didn't put in a baseline score when I started TTP because I was scared I would miss some of the lessons, and then that would be all that I got on test day. So I wanted all of the lessons. And so I did like the most in-depth self-study that they had, and it was about 9 months for me. Mm. Now you're done with the learning phase. What a relief. You get to do official practice test phase. This is where you're going to find those remaining gaps, anything that you should study more, anything that you felt good about, but you don't really remember it so well now, anything that when you knew what to expect, you did fine on it, but when it's just in a random question set, you're like, oh, I have no idea what to do. That is what the practice tests are for. They are your most accurate practice for dealing with the exam content and interface. In particular, the interface was pretty challenging for me. I think it's worth getting some practice. So I recommend you do all 6 if you can. Like I said, you do get 2 free practice tests, but because they are the best practice you're going to get, the most exam-like experience that you're going to get, the most timing similar experience, the most pop-ups and type of calculator and type of graphs accurate experience that you can get, then taking all 6, I think, is a very good investment of your time so that you get the best idea of how you will perform on the GMAT. Always don't try to take too many in a row because you really want to review your performance. So I know sometimes students want to save all their practice tests for the 2 weeks before their exam, and they'll just take a 2-hour test every other day. Do not do that because that is exhausting and it does not give you time to review. You want to take max 2 a week. So 1 test every 4 to 7 days, and then spend the next few days reviewing all the questions. I recommend that at this point you review them all. So far you've been tracking your errors in your log. When you do your mock exams, review every question to make sure that you did it the way you wanted to do it and that you're not missing any that you just guessed correctly on, because it's multiple choice. Like, you've got a 20% chance of just guessing the right answer, but you want to rely on luck as little as possible. Always take them accurately timed. The tests are challenging, in particular because the amount of stamina and sustained focus that they require. So if you take them accurately timed, then you're really practicing staying focused. If you pause them all the time, then you're not giving yourself like an honest score and an honest experience, and it might inflate your score in a way that would be hard to duplicate under real test conditions. Analyze your results after each test, look at everything, and then between your test, review the topics in practice as indicated by your results. So yes, if you missed a question, it's a great sign to look into that topic more. The other sign to look into a topic more is if you did not feel confident, like even if you got the right answer eventually, if you were faced with a certain type of question and you just did not feel great about your approach, or it took you a while to get started, then even if you eventually got there, I think it's worth doing a few more practice problems just to kind of push through that plateau. Let's see. because I'm prepping it while having to finish my bachelor's thesis and doing internship, and it feels so long. Yes, I prepped during when I was working full time, and it was basically all of my free time. And I only did a few hours a day, like 2 or 3 hours a day. And it was quite a lot of work. So I understand, but it is, you work hard and then it works out for you. So just don't overextend yourself because you don't want to burn out. But um, but yeah, it is a lot of work. I fully acknowledge that. I'm going through TTP now. A few questions. I noticed OG questions were suggested as part of the review. How effective is this? A few OG questions have negative feedback on GMAT Club. I think that the OG questions are beneficial because that's going to be, I mean, functionally the same writers are writing the questions that are in the guide and the current questions, even if it's different people. These questions go through really stringent requirements. Like GMAC is serious about these questions, so they are grading them on a strict rubric for the most part. And so I still think it's worth it to do the OG questions because that's going to be what you get on the test basically. And so the more familiar you are with the way that they are worded, the better you will be able to handle them. I'm sure that there are some that people don't love, but it still is good practice. And I think that it's great to look at them on GMAT Club. And so you can know, oh, is everyone like frustrated by this phrase or whatever, or is it just me? And then go from there. I'm doing the iChapter test. There are about 12 questions and two-part analysis. Does it make sense to do all 12 at one sitting? Yes, I would do your chapter and like DI tests that are 12 or 15 questions all together, because one thing that was really beneficial for me was not so much for DI, but for quant. There was some really long on TTP hard level exams that were like 18 questions long, and they were so draining. And so doing a few of those, I feel like prepared me for doing the exam really well, because you will never have so many like hard questions in a row. You get maxed out at how many hard questions you have. And so doing 12 or 15 or 18 challenging questions in a row, if you can get to that level of mental fitness, then the test can feel a bit easy by comparison. This stamina takes a lot out of me, and I assume I would not see so many in one sitting on the GMAT. Correct. But that is part of building the stamina. You don't want the amount of stamina to where like you barely cross the threshold of the exam. You would love to have like a little bit more than that so that you're able to operate sort of in your prime zone on the exam. Yeah, the hard tests on TTP, there were some that I spent more than an hour on, for sure. And one other thing I brushed over, but practice guessing and moving on. So when you practice untimed, you're really supposed to spend as much time figuring out how things are going as possible. And then as you get better at things, your timing will improve a little. You might introduce a bit more time pressure, but the mocks are where it's time to adhere to the time limit. So you can kind of practice getting it as close as you can to an answer and then being like, oh, I'm out of time, like I'm moving on. It's a bit of a pivot, but it's you'll get some practice. And the other thing I would say is at this point, I think it's really helpful to use whatever tool you're going to have to the best of your ability on the test. You can practice working with it. So if you're doing it at home, it's like a whiteboard, a two-sided whiteboard, and a dry erase marker. Get one. Get one for your house. I mean, if you're doing it at home, get one anyway, because you have to have one for the exam. If you're doing it at the testing center, it's like a legal sized laminated grid notebook. Get one of those and a wet erase marker. Get one of those in practice, because your notes with a pencil might be a little bit different than your notes with like a wet erase marker on a laminated piece of paper. And you want to get into the swing of using those materials. You don't want to try it for the first time on test day. Scheduling your GMAT, schedule your test when you're ready or when you have like a pretty good idea of when you'll be ready. I do not think that, I think I see people do a lot is that they want to schedule their tests and they're like, it should take me 3 months to study. I've decided. And so they schedule their GMAT in 3 months and then they're not ready for it. And then they end up having to take it twice. And it just adds a lot of pressure. Try not to do that. For my test, I think I scheduled it. Well, I think I scheduled it like a couple of weeks or maybe a month before I had to take it, but mostly because I had to take time off of work. And that was like when I was able to get off of work. But I didn't schedule it until I was like, "Oh, I'm pretty good." Like, I had maybe 1 or 2 more practice tests, but I was pretty happy with my performance, and I knew I would have time to finish them and also to rest before the exam, which is a thing I really advocate for. So, don't try to use your test date as a way to motivate you to study faster because give yourself the benefit of the doubt. You might be studying literally as fast as you can. You're better off just admitting that you don't know exactly when you'll be ready, especially when you first start prepping. Things can take longer than you thought. And then scheduling your exam when you are coming at it from a more informed perspective. And of course, it helps you. So instead of going into the test like mad and anxious, you can go into the test confident that you gave yourself all the time that you felt like you could spend on studying, and this will be an accurate representation of your skills. The OG questions mark things as easy, medium, and hard. I noticed that the GMAT Club ranked these questions in a different way. How should I read into this? It's kind of in score bands. I think on GMAT Club, they're in roughly bands of 50 points as an estimation of where they would fall. But that's basically just like a more restrictive subcategory. So things that are closer to the high 700s to 805 would be like hard questions, and then a little bit below that in the 600s would probably be medium, and then lower than that would be easy. And you can probably Google like the exact cutoff on points. Certain easy questions, according to OG, have a poor accuracy rate on GMAT Club, and certain hard questions on OG are super high accuracy on GMAT Club. And I think you can't always trust accuracy perfectly on forums because people might like retake the questions, and I don't know if it updates the accuracy for that. So it's a good general idea, but you don't want to compare yourself too much to other people's accuracy because a lot of people retake the questions. And I'm not sure which algorithms like factor that in and which ones only factor in your most recent attempt. Key preparation tips. Yes, preparing for the GMAT may take longer than you expected. That is okay. That does not reflect poorly on you. You are literally doing a thing that you have never done before. So it's not crazy to think that you can accurately guess how long it would take. Give yourself some grace. Expect some ups and downs when preparing for the GMAT. You'll probably have some ups and downs. Like there were some things, I think that it was a really satisfying experience in a lot of ways. I think that it was a really fun way to get like immediate feedback on my actions in a way that in the adult world you don't get so many concrete positive numerical feedback opportunities like that. But there's also some really challenging stuff, and you are doing a new thing, and it's a thing that you're gonna miss some questions on. That can be hard. Just prepare for some days will be challenging and some days will be good, and it's all in the service of your goal. And trust the process, right? You just because you have a bad day, that doesn't mean that you're a bad student or that you can't do better. I had I had some really frustrating periods and I had good periods and I did well. And so just have faith in your process, be diligent about your note taking, be diligent about your error tracking, and you will see improvements. effective preparation works. And here are some of our success stories. Um, we at TTP, we have a lot of very smart students, and we are super blessed, and we do love to share their success stories. So here are some of ours from, I think, recently. And hopefully you can also be a success on the GMAT, and you can come and do panels with me. And if you get a perfect score, then it'll just be you and me doing panels for GMAT clubs. So won't that be fun? Something to consider. I've taken the test twice in my previous attempt. I scored in Quant 84 and it dropped to Quant 79. In my recent attempt, I have brought TTP now. How should I use it to practice? So it kind of depends. First of all, your Quant score is um, super decent as a start, I would say. Just because your Quant score dropped, that doesn't mean that like you're worse at Quant. It could just be that you had an error or missed an easy question and you were heavily penalized for it. You're traditionally more penalized in points for easier questions that you miss than for harder questions that you miss. Um, so I would look through past questions that you have missed and see if you can identify the types of questions that you miss and the types of mistakes that you have made, and then you can use those parts of TTP if you really just want to be like as efficient as possible. Do some research into the sorts of mistakes that you're making and then target your preparation there. It doesn't feel as efficient up front, but I promise you in the long run it is saving you time. um, oh, and we do have this for our on-demand course. So there is our promo code specifically for this if you want to save it. Let's see. While doing TTP, there are questions that are labeled as part of easy test but have really low accuracy, less than 40%. Are these questions fairly ranked? Typically, the questions are ranked by in Quant, it's usually like the number of steps it takes to get to the answer. Quant, I think, is the most intuitive way to score a question. Oh, is it like pretty simple? Can you get there relatively quickly if you know what you're doing? Then easy. If it takes a lot of steps or it's like tricky in some way, it might be a medium or hard. In verbal, questions are usually ranked by how close the wrong answers are to the correct answer. And so some of those are missed by a lot of people, especially as they're first learning about verbal, because they don't yet understand the types of tricks that you have to look out for. And I think particularly in critical reasoning, it is an it is a subject that you probably have not very much practice in unless you have taken the LSAT. And so getting the hang of it can take some students like a while. It took me a long time to get the hang of it, just to even understand there's not a lot of rules to it, but to play within the rules of critical reasoning takes some practice. And so sometimes people will miss easy questions because they don't quite understand the rules yet, and that can make them have lower accuracy. So I would say they're probably fairly ranked from the point of view of how many steps it would take to get to the correct answer, but that doesn't mean that some of them aren't tricky as well. I have a fear that if I am not getting easy questions right, then I'm not doing something correct in my study. You really want your easy questions to have a high accuracy. So, on the one hand, like if you're missing easy questions, you do want to see what's going on so that you can make that mistake less and get your accuracy as close to 100% on those easy questions as you possibly can. On the other hand, you are learning material and people make mistakes. And so it's a sign that you might need to study more, but it could also just be like you misread something. And that's still a sign. Hey, try to read a little bit more slowly and not rush yourself. You are learning how to spend the right amount of attention on the test that isn't overthinking everything, but that is carefully considering all of the important details. It's a bit of a delicate balance. If I need to reach out to someone for assistance within TTP regarding a solution, is there office hours or something like that? There is office hours, and there is also like the chat, which usually I help out with. And so you can do like contact us, or you can do like the chat, and people will get back to you, and you can send a screenshot of the question you're looking at so they know exactly what you're talking about, and then they will explain what's going on and maybe help you find where you went awry. Any other questions that I missed? How do we know that we are ready to take the real test? I always think that I am not well prepared. Okay. So here's what happened for me, because I think that I'm the same. I I wanted to do all of the lessons, and I was anxious that I would not be prepared enough. And what happened with me is I did all the lessons on TTP. I took the mocks, and then like when I was reviewing them, I for some questions it was like obvious, like, oh, I need to brush up on this. But for some of the questions, especially because of the way they categorize questions in those broad categories, like I mentioned earlier, I wasn't super sure what I had messed up, and if it was like a specific knowledge gap, or if it was just like I didn't understand the question or what. So I ended up basically like going back through and speed reading the like the highlight lessons on TTP um for the whole course, because I was like, I started out and I was like, oh, I'll speed read these until I find the thing for this question. And then I feel like for some of them, I still wasn't 100% clear. So I just did the whole course. And also, I had to schedule my tests out for like a month. And so I had some time to fill the setting. And then after that, like after I got to the end of my mocks, I was like, it has to be now, like, even if I don't feel perfectly ready, I feel like I'm as ready as I'm going to be, and that if I kept preparing, I might just get like less and less familiar with those earlier lessons. And so I don't think it'll ever be perfect, but sometimes you've just got to be like, I've spent the amount of time that I feel like I gave this my very best, and like I'm as ready as I'm going to be. And if it's not perfect, that's okay. Um, but if you wait to be perfectly ready, then if you were like me, that will never happen, because there's always something that you could work on a little bit more. So you kind of have to find that limit for yourself. Yes, I made a silly mistake on a question on exponents, but 5 points penalty for that. That's kind of what I was mentioning earlier. The easier the GMAT ranks the questions that you miss, the more I think it penalizes your score for missing them, because it kind of expects you to get the easier questions right. And so it's not like, oh, I missed one question, so I'd have one less point every time or two less points every time. It's a bit more nuanced than that. Um, so the scoring isn't transparent. It's kind of a frustrating thing, but hey, it's GMAT's rodeo, so they get to decide the rules. All right. Any other questions in our last couple of minutes? Okay. I appreciate you all for hanging out, and I hope that this study plan was helpful. I know that this is a challenging thing, but I applaud you all for studying for the GMAT. You are you are really all impressive people, and I hope that you remember that when you are frustrated and that you can power through and just do incredible things. And yes, if you found this session helpful, please like and subscribe to the GMAT Club channel so other students can find it. I think GMAT Club is great, and so it is a good resource. We do want students who would benefit to be aware of all that they offer. All right, I think we can wrap it up then. Thank you all so much, and I will close it down.